I never thought the worst day of my life would come wrapped in white lace and champagne toasts. My name is Dorothy Bennett, and I'm 63 years old. I raised my son Michael alone after his father walked out when he was just 7. I worked double shifts at the hospital, went without new clothes for years, and put every penny I could into that boy's future. I bought a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio when Michael was 10, paid it off over 25 years of sacrifice. That house wasn't just property to me. It was proof that I'd kept my promise to give him stability, a foundation, a place to come home to. Michael grew up to be everything I'd hoped for. Kind, ambitious, grateful. He became a financial advisor, met a woman named Ashley Winters at a company retreat 2 years ago, and fell hard. I wanted to be happy for him. I really did. But from the first Sunday dinner I hosted after they got engaged, something felt wrong. Ashley barely looked at me when she spoke. She'd answer my questions with one-word responses, then turn to Michael with this bright, animated smile like I'd disappeared from the room. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was just one of those mothers who couldn't let go. So I swallowed my doubts and helped plan their wedding. If you've ever ignored your gut instinct because you desperately wanted to be wrong, you'll understand what came next. The wedding was beautiful, I'll give her that. 130 guests packed into the ballroom at the Riverview Inn, everything draped in ivory and gold. I wore a navy dress I'd saved for months to buy, had my hair done at a salon for the first time in years. I wanted to look like I belonged in my son's happiness. During the ceremony I cried, not just because I was losing my boy to another woman, but because I was so damn proud of the man he'd become despite everything we'd been through. When he said his vows, his voice cracked, and I saw that 7-year-old again, asking me why his daddy didn't love us anymore. The reception started off normal enough. Dinner, toasts, the first dance. I sat at a table near the back with my sister Diane and a few old friends from the hospital. We laughed, reminisced, watched Michael and Ashley glide across the dance floor. But I noticed Ashley's mother, Constance, kept glancing over at me with this odd expression. Not hostile exactly, but calculating. Like she was waiting for something. Then, about an hour into the reception, Ashley came walking toward my table. Her veil was gone, her makeup still perfect, but there was something hard in her eyes that made my stomach drop. She stopped right in front of me, and the conversations around us gradually died down. People sensed something was happening. Before you hear what happened next, do me a favor. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And check the description box below. I've got more stories like this one, stories about betrayal and survival that might make you feel a little less alone in whatever you're going through. Ashley didn't waste time with pleasantries. She held out her hand, palm up, and said loud enough for half the room to hear that she needed my house keys. Just like that. Said it was time for me to move into a senior living facility because Michael and she would be taking over the house. She'd apparently already picked out a place for me, some assisted living community 40 minutes away that she'd toured without my knowledge. She said it so casually, like she was asking me to pass the salt. I felt my face go hot. Everyone was staring now. I could see Michael across the room, frozen mid-conversation, his face going pale as he registered what was happening. I looked at Ashley, this woman who'd been in my son's life for 2 years, and very quietly told her no. I said I wasn't ready to leave my home, that nobody had consulted me about this plan, and that we could discuss it privately at another time. That's when she slapped me. The sound cracked through the ballroom like a gunshot. My cheek exploded in heat and pain. For a second, I couldn't process what had just happened. I'd never been struck in my life. I heard gasps, someone's glass hitting the floor and shattering. Diane jumped up from her seat, but I held up my hand to stop her. Ashley was standing there, breathing hard, her face flushed, and she said through gritted teeth that I was a selfish old woman who was standing in the way of their future. Michael finally moved. He came rushing over, his face a mess of shock and confusion, and he started to say something, but Ashley cut him off. She turned to him and said she was done being patient with me, that we'd talked about this, that it was time I accepted reality. Michael looked at me, and I saw something I'd never seen before in my son's eyes, uncertainty. Like he wasn't sure whose side he was supposed to be on. I stood up slowly, my hand against my burning cheek. The room was dead silent except for the sound of the DJ's equipment humming in the background. I picked up my purse with shaking hands, and I said clearly, calmly, that I was going to step outside for some air. I told Diane to stay, that I was fine. Then I walked out of that ballroom with everyone's eyes following me, their whispers starting before I even reached the door. I made it to the lobby, found a quiet corner near the windows overlooking the parking lot. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely unlock my phone. But I knew exactly who I needed to call. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for, James Thornton, the lawyer who'd handled the final paperwork when I paid off my mortgage 3 years ago. We'd stayed in touch. He'd bought me coffee a few times, checked in on me. Good man. Honest. He answered on the second ring. I told him where I was and what had just happened, my voice surprisingly steady despite the tears sliding down my face. I told him about the slap, about Ashley's demand, about the assisted living facility I'd never agreed to. There was a long pause, and then James said something that made my heart start pounding for an entirely different reason. He asked if I remembered signing any paperwork recently. Anything Michael might have brought over for me to look at. And that's when the memory hit me like ice water. 3 weeks ago, Michael had stopped by with a stack of papers. He'd said it was estate planning stuff, making sure everything was organized in case something happened to me. He'd seemed nervous, kept saying it was just precautionary, that everyone should have their affairs in order. I'd been making him lunch, distracted, and I'd signed where he'd told me to sign, trusting him completely because he was my son. Because I'd raised him to be trustworthy. James went quiet again. Then he told me he'd be there in 30 minutes. He said not to go back inside, not to say anything to anyone until he arrived. And he said something else that made my blood run cold. If Michael had me sign a quitclaim deed without explaining what it was, he might have already transferred my house into his name. It would have been legal if I'd signed it willingly, even if I didn't understand what I was signing. I sat down hard on one of the lobby couches. The woman I'd been an hour ago, the proud mother watching her son get married, felt like a stranger. I'd been played. Betrayed by my own child. And Ashley, that woman who'd just struck me in front of everyone I knew, had probably been the mastermind behind all of it. But here's what they didn't know about me. I'd spent 40 years as a surgical nurse. I'd kept my composure while holding retractors during emergency operations, while dealing with families in crisis, while working back-to-back shifts that would have broken younger people. I knew how to stay calm when everything was falling apart. And I knew that the worst thing you could do to someone who'd wronged you was to let them think they'd won, right up until the moment you proved them devastatingly wrong. So I dried my eyes, fixed my makeup in my compact mirror, and waited for James to arrive. Through the windows, I could see guests starting to spill out onto the patio for the cocktail hour. I could hear music drifting from the ballroom. My son's wedding was continuing without me, and somewhere in there, Ashley was probably celebrating her victory. She had no idea what was coming. James Thornton arrived 28 minutes later, pulling up in his silver Lexus with a briefcase in hand. He found me in the lobby, still sitting on that couch, and the look on his face told me everything I needed to know before he even opened his mouth. He sat down beside me, set the briefcase on the coffee table, and pulled out a folder. Inside was a copy of a document I'd signed 3 weeks ago. He'd stopped by the county recorder's office on his way over and pulled the records. It was a quitclaim deed, exactly as he'd feared. By signing it, I'd transferred full ownership of my house to Michael Bennett. No money exchanged, no mortgage transfer, just my signature giving away 25 years of sacrifice. The deed had been filed 4 days after I signed it. My house, the house I'd worked myself to exhaustion to pay for, legally belonged to my son now. I stared at that document until the words blurred. James was talking, explaining something about undue influence and possible fraud, about how we might be able to challenge it if we could prove I didn't understand what I was signing. But his tone told me what he wasn't saying outright: it would be an uphill battle. I'd signed it. My signature was right there, perfectly legal, notarized and everything. I asked James about the notary. He checked the document and frowned. The notary public was someone named Rita Chen, with an address listed in Worthington, the same suburb where Ashley's parents lived. I didn't recognize the name, but I'd bet everything I had left that she was connected to Ashley's family somehow. For anyone who's ever trusted someone completely and had that trust shattered, you know that the pain isn't just emotional, it's physical. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. I kept thinking about all those years, all those double shifts, all those times I'd gone without so Michael could have. New sneakers for basketball. A laptop for college. Help with his first apartment's security deposit. I'd given him everything, and he'd repaid me by stealing my home. But then something shifted inside me. The grief started hardening into something else. Something colder and more focused. I looked at James and asked him a simple question. What would happen if I reported my house keys stolen and changed all the locks before Michael and Ashley could take possession? James thought about it. He said it wouldn't change the ownership on paper, but it would buy me time. More importantly, it would send a message that I wasn't going to roll over and die quietly. He pulled out his phone and started making calls. A locksmith he knew who did emergency jobs, a real estate attorney who specialized in elder financial abuse cases, even a private investigator who could dig into Ashley and her family's background. I told him to do it all. I didn't care about the cost. I had money saved, money Michael didn't know about, in an account I'd opened years ago as an emergency fund. If this wasn't an emergency, I didn't know what was. While James was coordinating everything, making plans and taking notes, I asked him to do one more thing. I asked him to come inside with me, to walk back into that reception, because I wanted to see their faces when they realized I wasn't alone anymore. That I had someone in my corner who understood exactly what they'd done. James hesitated. He said it might be better to handle this quietly, through legal channels, without confrontation. But I shook my head. I'd been quiet my whole life. I'd been accommodating, understanding, patient. And where had it gotten me? Slapped across the face at my own son's wedding while 130 people watched. So we walked back toward the ballroom together. The cocktail hour was ending, and guests were filing back inside for the cake cutting. I could hear laughter, the clink of glasses, the DJ announcing the next event. James stayed close beside me, his presence solid and reassuring. We paused just outside the main doors, and I took a long breath. If you've ever had to walk back into a room full of people who witnessed your humiliation, you know how much courage that takes. If this story is resonating with you, hit that subscribe button. I share these experiences because I know I'm not the only one who's lived through betrayal like this. We entered quietly, slipping in through the side doors. Most people were focused on the front of the room where Michael and Ashley were posing with the cake. But Diane spotted me immediately, her face flooding with relief. She started to come over, but I motioned for her to stay where she was. I wanted to watch for a moment, to see them playing the happy couple while I stood there with the lawyer who was about to unravel their entire scheme. Michael saw me next. He was laughing at something Ashley had said, and then his eyes drifted across the room and landed on me. The laughter died. His face went pale again, the same way it had when Ashley slapped me. He touched Ashley's arm, trying to get her attention, but she was busy positioning herself for photos. That's when I stepped forward, James right beside me. I didn't march up to them or make a scene. I simply walked slowly, deliberately, toward the front of the room. People started noticing, the whispers spreading like ripples in water. Ashley finally turned and saw me coming. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, then irritation, then confusion when she saw James. Michael put down the cake knife. He said my name, his voice cracking slightly. Mom. I stopped about 10 feet away from them, close enough that we could talk without shouting, but far enough that I had space to breathe. I said hello to my son, kept my voice calm and level. Then I introduced James Thornton, my attorney. I watched Ashley's face change, watched her eyes narrow, watched her mother Constance stand up abruptly from her seat at the head table. James didn't waste time. He addressed Michael directly, his voice professional but firm. He said he'd obtained a copy of the quitclaim deed Michael had me sign 3 weeks ago. He said he'd spoken with the district attorney's office on the drive over, and that depending on whether I wanted to press charges, this could potentially be investigated as financial exploitation of an elderly person, a felony in Ohio. The room went absolutely silent. Even the DJ stopped the music. Michael's face crumbled. He started shaking his head, stammering that it wasn't like that, that Ashley had just suggested it would be easier for estate planning purposes, that he'd never intended to force me out. But his words rang hollow, especially given what Ashley had said to me less than an hour ago. She'd demanded my keys. She'd already picked out a facility to ship me off to. This had been planned, coordinated, deliberate. Ashley, though, didn't crumble. She stepped forward, her face red with anger, and told James he was making a scene at their wedding, that this was inappropriate and could wait until Monday. She actually had the audacity to tell my lawyer that he was being unprofessional. James smiled, not a friendly smile, but the kind that lawyers give when they know they have you cornered. He said that assaulting an elderly woman in public was also inappropriate, and that he had already identified at least 30 witnesses willing to provide statements about what had happened earlier. He said that combined with the deed transfer, we were looking at a pattern of coercion and abuse that would be very difficult to explain away. That's when Michael started crying. Actual tears, streaming down his face, ruining his wedding makeup job. He turned to Ashley and said something I couldn't quite hear, but her response was loud and clear. I told you she'd be difficult. I told you we should have handled this differently. Handled this differently. Like there was a version of stealing my house that would have been acceptable. I stepped closer then, looked my son in the eyes, and said something I never thought I'd have to say to my own child. I told him he had 48 hours to sign that house back over to me, with a legally binding agreement that he would never attempt anything like this again. If he didn't, James would pursue every legal remedy available, including criminal charges for fraud and elder abuse. I said I'd also be contacting every professional licensing board relevant to his career as a financial advisor, because what he'd done to me was exactly the kind of ethical violation that cost people their licenses. Michael's boss was at the wedding, sitting 3 tables away, looking increasingly uncomfortable. The implications weren't lost on anyone. Then I turned to Ashley. I said I'd worked with enough manipulative people in my life to recognize one when I saw her. I said I didn't know if she'd married my son because she loved him or because she saw an opportunity to get her hands on property and assets without having to work for them. But I said I was going to find out. James's investigator would be looking into her background, her family's finances, any similar situations she might have been involved in before. And if we found anything at all, I'd make sure Michael knew exactly who he'd married. Ashley's composure finally cracked. She called me a vindictive old bitch. Her mother shouted something about lawsuits. Several guests stood up, either in shock or preparing to leave. The wedding coordinator came rushing over, trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. But I was done. I'd said everything I needed to say. I looked at Michael one last time, this boy I'd raised, this man I didn't recognize anymore, and I told him I loved him. I said I always would, because he was my son. But love and trust were 2 different things, and he'd destroyed the latter tonight. Whether we could ever rebuild it was entirely up to him. Then James and I walked out together. Behind us, I heard Ashley screaming at Michael, heard Constance demanding they do something, heard the wedding coordinator trying desperately to get everyone to please take their seats for the cake cutting. We didn't look back. In the parking lot, James told me the locksmith would meet me at my house in 90 minutes. The investigator would start work first thing tomorrow morning. And the real estate attorney had already drawn up papers for Michael to sign, returning full ownership to me plus a restraining order preventing him from coming within 500 feet of my property without my explicit permission. I thanked him. I'm not sure I've ever meant those 2 words more sincerely in my life. Then I got in my car and drove home, to my home, while my son's wedding reception collapsed into chaos behind me. The locksmith was already waiting when I pulled into my driveway, his van parked under the streetlight. His name was Eddie, a man in his 50s with kind eyes and calloused hands. James had apparently explained the situation because Eddie told me he had daughters of his own and that what my son had done made him sick. He said he'd upgrade all my locks to high-security deadbolts, no charge for the labor. I started crying right there on my front porch, and Eddie just patted my shoulder and got to work. While he changed the locks, I walked through my house like I was seeing it for the first time. Every room held memories, Michael's height marks on the kitchen doorframe, the wall I'd repainted after he accidentally put a hole in it playing indoor basketball, the bathroom where I'd helped him get ready for prom. This house had been our sanctuary, our proof that we could survive anything as long as we had each other. Now it felt tainted. Contaminated by his betrayal. I made tea I didn't drink and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Michael and I had eaten hundreds of meals together. My phone started buzzing around 10 p.m. Text messages, first from Diane checking on me, then from friends who'd been at the wedding asking if I was okay. Then, inevitably, from Michael. His first message said he was sorry. The second said Ashley was hysterical. The third said I'd ruined their wedding. The fourth begged me to call him so we could talk this through like adults. I read each one, felt nothing, and turned off my phone. Eddie finished around 11. He showed me the new keys, demonstrated how the deadbolts worked, and gave me his personal cell number in case I had any trouble. After he left, I locked every door and window, set my alarm system, and sat in the dark living room waiting for I didn't know what. Sleep never came. I spent that night researching Ohio elder abuse laws on my laptop, reading through case studies of similar situations. I learned that financial exploitation of the elderly is more common than anyone wants to admit, often perpetrated by family members, often involving property transfers and coerced signatures. I learned that even when the victim signs documents, it can still be prosecuted if undue influence or diminished capacity can be proven. But I also learned how hard these cases were to win. How families often pressure victims to drop charges. How defense attorneys argue that the transactions were gifts, not theft. How juries struggle to believe that a child could do something so calculating to their own parent. By sunrise, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to press criminal charges unless Michael refused to return my property. Not because he didn't deserve it, but because I couldn't bear the thought of sending my own son to prison. Some part of me, the part that had raised him, loved him, sacrificed everything for him, still hoped he could be redeemed. That he'd wake up, realize what he'd done, and choose to make it right. I was giving him a chance I probably shouldn't have. James called at 8 a.m. He'd drawn up the documents, a deed transferring the house back to me, a promissory note where Michael acknowledged wrongdoing, and a restraining order that would remain in effect until we both agreed otherwise. He said he'd served them to Michael's hotel room an hour ago, the honeymoon suite at the Riverview Inn where he and Ashley had planned to spend their wedding night. According to the hotel clerk who'd assisted with service, Ashley had answered the door in her wedding night lingerie, seen the legal papers, and thrown them at the process server while screaming obscenities. Michael had apparently been passed out on the bed, sleeping off what the clerk described as a considerable amount of alcohol consumed after the reception's dramatic conclusion. Some honeymoon. James said we'd know by end of day whether Michael would sign or whether this was going to turn into a protracted legal battle. He recommended I stay home, keep my doors locked, and not respond to any contact from Michael or Ashley. He'd handle all communication through official channels. So I waited. I made coffee, forced myself to eat toast I couldn't taste, and watched my phone like it was a bomb about to detonate. Diane came over around noon with groceries and homemade soup. She sat with me in the kitchen, held my hand, and told me I was the strongest person she knew. I didn't feel strong. I felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped out my insides and left only a shell. Around 3 p.m., my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Michael standing on my porch, still wearing his dress pants from the wedding and a wrinkled white undershirt. His hair was a mess, his eyes swollen from crying. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Every instinct screamed at me to open that door, to hold my baby boy and tell him everything would be okay. But I remembered what James had said. I remembered the restraining order provisions. And I remembered Ashley's hand connecting with my face, Michael's moment of uncertainty about whose side to take. So I didn't open the door. I spoke through it instead, my voice loud enough for him to hear. I asked if he'd signed the papers. He said he had. He said they were notarized and filed with the courthouse, that the house was mine again, that he'd never try anything like that again. He said Ashley had left him. She'd apparently checked out of the hotel that morning, driven back to her parents' house, and told him via text message that she wasn't interested in being married to someone who couldn't stand up to his mother. I'd have laughed if it wasn't so pathetic. She'd orchestrated this entire scheme, convinced Michael to defraud his own mother, and then abandoned him the second there were consequences. Michael was crying now, his voice breaking up. He said he didn't know what he'd been thinking. He said Ashley had made it sound so reasonable, so practical. She'd said I was getting too old to maintain the house, that I'd be happier in a community with other seniors, that he deserved to inherit his childhood home since he was an only child. She'd painted me as selfish for wanting to stay in a 3-bedroom house when I lived alone. She'd made him believe he was helping me by forcing me out. He said he was sorry. He kept saying it, over and over like a prayer. Sorry, so sorry, please Mom, I'm so sorry. I wanted to forgive him. The mother in me wanted to throw open that door and hold him until his crying stopped. But the woman who'd been slapped and humiliated and robbed couldn't do it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I told him through the door that I'd received confirmation the house was back in my name. I told him I was glad Ashley had left because she was poison, and he was better off finding out now rather than 5 years down the line. I told him I needed time. Months. Maybe years. I said I didn't know if our relationship could survive this, but I knew for certain it couldn't be fixed in a single conversation on my front porch 3 days after he'd tried to steal my home. Then I told him to leave. Just leave, go back to his apartment, go to work, go live his life. But leave me alone while I figured out if I even wanted him in mine anymore. He stood there for another minute, shoulders shaking with sobs. Then I heard his footsteps retreating down my porch steps, heard his car door slam, heard him drive away. I slid down the door and sat on my entryway floor, Diane rushing over to sit beside me, and I finally let myself completely fall apart. For the next 2 weeks, I existed in a fog. James's investigator delivered a report on Ashley that confirmed my worst suspicions. She'd been engaged twice before, both times to men significantly older than her with substantial assets. The first engagement ended when the man's adult children raised concerns about her motives. The second ended when he discovered she'd opened credit cards in his name. She had a history, not quite criminal but deeply unethical, of targeting men she could manipulate financially. Michael had been her latest mark, and I'd been collateral damage. I shared the report with Michael via email, the only communication I was willing to have with him. His response was brief: "I see it now. I'm so sorry. I love you." I didn't reply. Check the description box below for more stories about families torn apart by betrayal and manipulation. Sometimes you need to know you're not alone in the aftermath. Friends rallied around me. Former colleagues from the hospital, neighbors, people from my book club. They brought meals, sat with me, let me talk or be silent depending on what I needed. Diane practically moved in for a while, sleeping in the guest room, making sure I ate and showered and didn't completely disappear into my grief. One night, about 3 weeks after the wedding, I found myself standing in Michael's old bedroom. I'd left it mostly unchanged even after he moved out. His high school trophies still on the shelf, his old posters on the walls. I sat on his childhood bed and tried to reconcile the boy who'd lived in this room with the man who'd betrayed me. I couldn't do it. They felt like 2 different people. That's when I realized something important. I'd been grieving my son like he'd died. In a way, he had. The Michael I'd raised, the one I'd believed in. He was gone. In his place was a stranger who'd chosen a manipulative woman over his own mother, who'd signed legal documents to steal from the person who'd sacrificed everything for him, who'd stood by while his new wife struck me in public. I couldn't get that Michael back. He was gone. What I could do was decide how to move forward with the Michael who existed now, the one who claimed remorse, who'd signed the house back over, who was apparently going through a divorce before his marriage was even a month old. Did I want him in my life? That was the question I couldn't answer. It's been 8 months since Michael's wedding. 8 months since I learned what my son was capable of. 8 months of therapy, sleepless nights, and learning to trust my own judgment again. The house is still mine. I wake up every morning grateful for that fact, even though the gratitude comes with a bitter edge. I shouldn't have to feel grateful for keeping what I'd earned through decades of hard work. It should have been a given. Michael has tried to rebuild our relationship. He sends emails every week. Updates about his life, apologies for his mistakes, requests to talk on the phone or meet for coffee. I've responded to some, ignored others. We've had 3 brief phone conversations where he cried and I mostly listened. I haven't seen him in person since that day on my porch. Ashley filed for divorce 6 weeks after the wedding. According to Michael, she'd apparently found another target, a widower in his 70s with a paid-off house in Upper Arlington. Michael said he'd tried to warn the man about her history, but the guy thought Michael was just a bitter ex making trouble. Some people have to learn the hard way. The irony isn't lost on me that Michael is now trying to save someone else from the exact scheme he'd participated in against me. James's investigator found something else interesting. The notary who'd witnessed my signature on that quitclaim deed, Rita Chun, was Ashley's aunt. She'd apparently notarized several suspicious documents over the years, including the paperwork for Ashley's second broken engagement. James reported her to the Secretary of State's Notary Division. Her commission was suspended pending investigation. Small victory, but I'll take it. Diane keeps telling me I should forgive Michael, that life's too short to hold grudges, that he was manipulated by Ashley and deserves a second chance. My therapist is more measured. She says forgiveness is something I can work toward if I want to, but I shouldn't feel pressured to do it on anyone else's timeline. That my boundaries are valid, my hurt is valid, and reconciliation has to happen at my pace or not at all. Most days, I don't know what I want. I miss my son. I miss the relationship we had before Ashley entered his life. But I can't unknow what I know now, that when faced with a choice between his mother and a woman he'd known for 2 years, he chose her. That he was willing to make me homeless to please his new wife. That he watched her slap me and hesitated. Those facts sit in my chest like stones, heavy and immovable. I've made changes in my life. I updated my will, put everything in an irrevocable trust that Michael can't touch even if something happens to me. I gave Diane power of attorney for medical and financial decisions. I joined a support group for elder financial abuse survivors. Turns out there are a lot of us, more than I ever imagined. We meet twice a month in a church basement and share our stories. Some people were victimized by strangers or caregivers, but most were betrayed by family. Children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews who saw their elderly relatives as ATMs or inheritance opportunities rather than people. Listening to their stories helps. Knowing I'm not alone in this specific kind of heartbreak helps. One woman, Margaret, lost her house to a daughter who'd forged her signature on mortgage documents. Another, Bill, had a son who drained his retirement accounts through financial manipulation. We sit in that basement and bear witness to each other's pain, and somehow that makes it a little more bearable. I've also started volunteering at a legal aid clinic that helps seniors with financial and housing issues. I spend 2 afternoons a week helping people navigate the system, filling out forms, making phone calls, connecting them with attorneys like James who'll take cases pro bono. It feels good to help others avoid what happened to me. It gives me purpose on days when the grief threatens to swallow me whole. Michael found out about my volunteer work somehow, probably through Diane, and sent me an email saying he was proud of me, that I was turning something terrible into something meaningful. I didn't respond, but I saved the email. Maybe that means something. Maybe it means I'm not ready to completely sever the connection, even if I can't actively maintain it right now. Last month, he sent me a different kind of message. He said he'd started therapy, that he was working through how he'd let Ashley manipulate him, trying to understand his own patterns and vulnerabilities. He said his therapist suggested he might have been seeking approval from a strong female figure after feeling like he'd disappointed me by getting divorced from his first wife years ago, a marriage I'd supported even though it ended badly. He said he'd been so desperate for Ashley's approval that he'd ignored every red flag, including her treatment of me. He said he understood if I never forgave him, but he wanted me to know he was trying to become a better person. The kind of person I'd raised him to be before he lost his way. I read that email 5 times. Then I wrote back. Just 2 sentences, I'm glad you're in therapy. Keep going. It's not reconciliation. It's not forgiveness. But it's the first time in 8 months I've acknowledged that I see his efforts, even if I can't fully embrace them yet. Some people might think I'm being too hard on him. They might say everyone makes mistakes, that Ashley manipulated him too, that I should just move on and rebuild our relationship. But those people didn't feel that slap across their face. They didn't sign documents trusting their child, only to discover they'd been defrauded. They didn't stand in front of 130 people while their new daughter-in-law demanded their home keys like it was her right to take everything away. Until you've lived through that specific betrayal, you don't get to tell me how long to hurt or when to forgive. My therapist asked me recently what I wanted my life to look like 5 years from now. I thought about it for a long time. I said I wanted to still be in my house. I wanted to still be volunteering, helping other seniors protect themselves. I wanted Diane and my friends and my book club and my little routines. And Michael? She asked if I saw him in that future. I said I didn't know. I said maybe. Maybe if he keeps doing the work, keeps showing me through actions, not just words, that he's changed, maybe there's a path back to some version of a relationship. It won't ever be what it was. That innocence is gone, that trust is shattered. But maybe we could build something new. Something more honest, even if it's more fragile. Or maybe not. Maybe this is one of those betrayals you don't recover from. Maybe I'll spend the rest of my life with a sun-shaped hole in my heart, and that'll just be the price I pay for having loved him enough to give him everything. Time will tell. What I do know is this: I'm still standing. I'm 63 years old, I own my home free and clear, and I survived my own son trying to take it from me. That's not nothing. On my worst days, when the loneliness feels crushing and I wonder if I should have just handed over those keys to keep the peace, I remind myself of that fact. I survived. I fought back. I didn't let them erase me. There are moments, usually late at night when the house is quiet, when I allow myself to imagine a different version of that wedding day. One where Ashley never made that demand. Where Michael had never let her poison him against me. Where I danced with my son, toasted his happiness, and went home feeling like my job as his mother was complete. That version exists somewhere in an alternate universe, and sometimes the grief of losing it is almost unbearable. But then morning comes. I make my coffee, I check in with Diane, I look at my calendar and see the people I'm scheduled to help at the legal clinic. I go about my day with purpose and dignity. And I survive another 24 hours in this version of reality where my son betrayed me and I had to save myself. The house feels different now. I've redecorated Michael's old room, turned it into a craft space where I work on quilting projects. I've replaced some furniture, changed some paint colors, trying to make the place feel like mine again instead of a museum of broken memories. It helps, a little. Some days I walk through these rooms and feel peace. Other days I feel haunted. I've also discovered something unexpected: I like living alone. For years I defined myself by my relationships. As a wife, then a single mother, then Michael's mom even after he moved out. My identity was always wrapped up in taking care of someone else. Now, for the first time in my adult life, I'm just Dorothy. Not Dorothy the nurse, not Dorothy the mother. Just me, figuring out who that is. I've taken up painting. Terrible, amateurish landscapes that will never hang in a gallery, but they're mine. I've started traveling. Small trips, weekend getaways to state parks and historical sites I'd always wanted to visit but never had time for. I bought myself a decent camera and started a photography hobby. I'm learning that my life doesn't end just because my relationship with my son did, or at least transformed into something unrecognizable. Last week, I got an email from Michael with a subject line that made my heart stop: "I'm sorry," with an attachment. I almost deleted it without opening, but curiosity won. The attachment was a check for $15,000. His email explained that he'd calculated roughly how much I'd spent helping him over the years that he'd never paid back. First apartment deposit, car repairs, help with his first house down payment, wedding expenses. He said the check didn't come close to covering everything, especially not the emotional cost, but he wanted to start making financial amends at least. He said he didn't expect anything in return. No forgiveness, no reconciliation, no relationship. He just wanted me to know he understood now how much I'd sacrificed, and he wanted to pay back what he could. I stared at that email for an hour. Then I called James and asked him if accepting the money would create any legal complications. He said it wouldn't. If anything, it was an admission of wrongdoing that strengthened my position if I ever changed my mind about pursuing charges. I haven't cashed the check yet. It's sitting in my desk drawer, and I take it out sometimes and look at it. $15,000 is real money, especially for someone living on a fixed income. I could use it for a new roof, for traveling, for cushioning my retirement accounts. But taking it feels like accepting his attempt at redemption, and I don't know if I'm ready for that. Diane says I should cash it. She says Michael's trying, and the least I can do is acknowledge that. My therapist says I should do whatever feels right to me, that there's no correct answer. The other survivors in my support group are split. Some say take the money and run, others say money can't fix what he broke. I don't know what I'll decide. Maybe I'll cash it tomorrow. Maybe I'll send it back. Maybe it'll sit in that drawer for another year, while I figure out what it means to me. What I've learned through all of this is that betrayal doesn't have a clean resolution. It's not like the movies where there's a big confrontation, someone apologizes, everyone cries and hugs, and everything goes back to normal. Real betrayal is messy and complicated. It's loving someone and hating what they did to you at the same time. It's wanting them in your life and needing them out of it simultaneously. It's carrying contradictory feelings that don't resolve into neat conclusions. Some days I miss Michael so much I can barely breathe. Other days I'm so angry I'm glad I don't have to see his face. Both things are true. Both things exist in me at once, and I've had to learn to live with that dissonance. I've also learned that you can't protect yourself from everyone. You can be smart, vigilant, careful, but if someone you love and trust decides to hurt you, they'll find a way. The people closest to you have the most access, the most knowledge of your vulnerabilities, the most opportunity to exploit your affection. That's a terrifying truth to accept, but it's real. Does that mean we shouldn't trust anyone? I don't think so. I think it means we have to be thoughtful about who we trust and how much access we give them. It means we have to pay attention to actions, not just words. It means we have to protect ourselves even, maybe especially, from family. I wish someone had told me these things before that wedding day. I wish I'd understood that love doesn't always protect you, that being someone's mother doesn't guarantee their loyalty, that people can change in ways you never see coming. Maybe I'd have been more careful. Maybe I'd have asked more questions when Michael brought those papers over. Maybe I'd have seen the warning signs with Ashley. Or maybe not. Maybe some lessons can only be learned through pain. If you've made it this far in my story, thank you for listening. Thank you for bearing witness to what happened to me and sitting with the discomfort of knowing that families can be brutal, that children can betray parents, that happily ever after isn't guaranteed just because you love someone with everything you have. If you're going through something similar, if someone you trusted has hurt you in ways you didn't think possible, I want you to know you're not alone. There are more of us than you'd think, walking around with these wounds, trying to figure out how to keep living while carrying them. Some days are harder than others. Some days you'll feel like you're healing. Some days the grief will knock you flat all over again. But you'll survive it. You'll find your way through, one day at a time, one decision at a time. You'll learn who you are outside of that relationship. You'll discover strengths you didn't know you had. You'll build a life that's different from what you planned, but still worth living. Michael texted me this morning, just 2 words, Happy Thanksgiving. The holiday is next week, and it'll be my first one without him in 63 years. Diane's hosting, and I'll be there with her kids and grandkids, people who love me and have never tried to steal from me. It'll be different. It'll hurt. But I'll get through it. I haven't responded to his text yet. I might not. Or I might send back the same 2 words, a tiny acknowledgement that we're both still here, still hurting, still figuring this out. That's where I am right now. Not healed, not whole, but surviving. Learning that survival is its own kind of victory. Learning that you can lose your son and your trust and your innocence and still wake up the next morning with reasons to keep going. My house is mine. My life is mine. And maybe, just maybe, someday there'll be room in it for a relationship with Michael again. A different one, built on reality instead of the illusion of unconditional trust. One where we both acknowledge what happened, where he continues proving through actions that he's changed, where I can slowly, carefully let my guard down by inches instead of miles. Or maybe there won't be room. Maybe this is what irreparable damage looks like. 2 people who love each other but can't be in each other's lives because the hurt runs too deep. I honestly don't know which future I'm heading toward. But I'm starting to make peace with not knowing. With living in the uncertainty. With understanding that some questions don't have answers, and some wounds don't fully heal, and some relationships exist in this liminal space between over and ongoing. For now, I'm focusing on what I can control. My volunteer work. My hobbies. My friendships. The slow, steady work of rebuilding myself into someone who's been through hell and came out the other side changed but not destroyed. That's my story. That's what happened when my son's bride slapped me and demanded my house keys, and I refused to disappear quietly into the fate they'd planned for me. I fought back. I survived. And I'm still here, still standing, still figuring out what comes next. If this story resonated with you, if you've experienced betrayal or family trauma or found strength you didn't know you had, please check the description box below. I share these stories because I know how isolating it feels to go through something like this. You need to know you're not alone, that other people understand, that survival is possible even when it doesn't feel like it. And if you're watching from somewhere in the world where family is everything, where questioning your children's motives feels like a betrayal in itself, I want you to know it's okay to protect yourself. It's okay to have boundaries. It's okay to survive at the expense of relationships that are hurting you. You don't owe anyone access to your life, your home, or your peace. Not even family, not even your children. That's the lesson I learned at 63 years old, standing in a ballroom with a handprint burning on my face. Better late than never. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone out there feel a little less alone tonight. Check the description box for more stories like this, stories of survival, betrayal, and the messy, complicated work of healing. And leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Sometimes knowing there are people out there who understand makes all the difference. My name is Dorothy Bennett. I'm 63 years old. I own my house. And I survived my own son trying to take everything from me. That's not the happy ending I wanted. But it's the true ending I got. And somehow, I'm learning to live with that.